But today we're going to talk about the real reason that socially anxious people are not as well liked. And by understanding that, there's a clear path of what you do about it. It's a lot different than people might expect. I worked with somebody a little while ago now who was quite socially anxious, and then when we got in to try to figure out the particular model for him, we discovered that he didn't ask people questions. And the reason why is, he was happy to kind of talk about himself and maybe answer some questions and contribute stuff when it came up, which is oftentimes hard in social anxiety. But he didn't ask the people that he talked to or a group any questions. And the reason why it was an anxious threat system idea. The fear was if he asked questions, then he'd be revealing that he didn't know something very well, and he might seem like lacking in knowledge or uneducated. He thought he might give this impression of sort of like inferiority and low status, because he was concerned that his question he'd ask, like, it would reveal how little he knew. Like, he really thought he wouldn't know much, and people would notice that. He also thought maybe people might find it intrusive, or he might ask the wrong question. In some way, the question would reveal these bad traits. So he didn't ask any questions. And what I had him do was, part of how this treatment works, you figure out the fears, and then, like a scientist, you test it out. So I had him practice with me first and ask questions, have a conversation, ask me questions, and then we'll see how it plays out. We'll see, do you come across in some negative way because of these questions? Do I notice that? Do I think that? What do you think? So we did it, and it all seemed fine. And he sent out to test it out with people in his life. And he came back and reported that when he asked questions, when he started asking these questions, to his surprise, people really opened up. People started explaining a lot more and talking more about themselves, self-disclosing. They appeared very happy that he was asking these questions. So contrary to what the emotional brain suggested, there wasn't a danger to asking more questions. In fact, it went a lot better, even though it felt to him like he was taking a risk. So this leads us to this discussion of the real reason that social anxiety causes problems. So there's a ton of research. It sounds like bad news. There's a ton of research that shows that people with social anxiety disorder are less well liked than everybody else. I'm going to be pretty general, not real specific about all the studies here, just so you get the point. But there's a bunch of these studies showing that. Like, there's a drop in liking. They're just not liked as much, which sounds really depressing. And if the research, this is why you got to be really careful with research. If it was left with that, it's a pretty depressing finding. But luckily, people do studies to try to find out why. Like, what's the reason for this? Is it the anxiety itself? But what you find is, with social anxiety, people don't just have anxiety and interact. They have anxiety, and then they kick in a whole bunch of defensive maneuvers, self-protection behaviors. The researchers, when they started figuring this out, called it safety behaviors. I tend to use self-protective behaviors, but they found that socially anxious people, when interacting in their studies, engaged in a lot of protective maneuvers to try to stop things from going wrong. So to try to control the outcome and to prevent rejection. And everybody else was just interacting, but the socially anxious folks were doing these particular behaviors They might hide while in the social setting, try to not be noticed as much. They'd avoid eye contact with people. So instead of looking at them and like during like people talking, they would look down and look away. There's a lot of stuff around controlling what you say. So filtering it out, trying to only say things that are great, saying very little, speaking really softly, maybe you wouldn't be heard. Trying to say things that sounded intelligent or witty, saying nothing at all. Controlling body language, trying to like appear a certain way, like being very aware of where the hands are, or the like maneuvers to not give away maybe how anxious you are or how you're feeling. For people that sweat, they'd find they'd wear extra clothing to cover up the sweating, which of course would make them sweat more. People would put on makeup to hide blushing. They might spend hours trying to groom themselves or only wear certain clothes or not wear certain things. So that's just a few of these, but these are all, think about them, they call them safety behaviors, but they're all self-protective methods where someone is afraid that they're going to get rejected and they're trying to do things to prevent it. The problem is that people notice these, and anxiety itself is not well noticed, but the safety behaviors are noticed, and people have a reaction to them. People don't mind anxiety, but they don't like safety behaviors. Oftentimes they're kind of unexpected or unusual, but a lot of times, and this is the real problem, a lot of times they cut off connection. It's really hard to connect with someone who's doing things that protect themselves. They're not looking at you, they're not asking questions, they're not sharing things, they're really being careful what's coming out, they're hiding, they're backing away. Those are all the opposite of like warm, curious, friendly social behavior. This is similar to the idea that, you know, people who are shy often complain that people think they're arrogant, and so people will often get annoyed at them even though they're actually shy. They're a bit anxious. So what the studies found is, the social anxious people were using these self-protective behaviors. People noticed them, didn't like them, and in fact that was the reason that the socially anxious people were less well liked. It was explained by the self-protection behaviors. And in fact, they had sort of follow-up studies where people were sent to interact and were not allowed to use these. They were forced to be authentic, anxious, but still engaged people. And what they found is that they were just as well liked as everybody else. The problem was not the anxiety. The anxiety, a lot of times, was seen to a certain extent, but they weren't disliked. It wasn't the anxiety, it was the response to the anxiety. It was the self-protection. And this is why, when it comes to treatment, we don't want you to hide the anxiety. We're not concerned about that. That doesn't make a huge difference. What we want is for you to realize that the social environment is safe. In order to do that, the protections have to come down. We know when you look at different kinds of treatment, if you send somebody to do treatment but you let them self-protect, their anxiety doesn't get better. If you put them into treatment and you make them drop the self-protection and engage, they get a lot better. So there's a different, they found that in separating the treatment. It works, it gets a little better, but not as much. Drop this stuff, really gets better. So that's why treatment-wise, we're always looking to drop this. Protections cut off connection. They make you more anxious and they cut off connection. So we need to drop those. Little by little, piece by piece, and like my patient from the beginning, test it out. Your anxious brain is telling you you need that protection. If you don't have it, something's going to go horribly wrong. Be skeptical. Is that true? Test it out. What you're likely to find is that it goes much better than you think. Okay. Thanks a lot for watching. Hope it was helpful. Please subscribe to my channel, rate things. I think you can rate things. And if you have any questions or topics you want to hear about, then just write it in the comments. Okay, thanks a lot.